Hi everyone, and welcome back to our reading of Five Children and It by E. Nesbit. We left off last time after the children met the Psammead and wished for him to make them beautiful. So let's continue and find out what happens next. Chapter 2. Golden Guineas. Anthea woke in the morning from a very real sort of dream, in which she was walking in the zoological gardens on a pouring wet day without an umbrella. The animals seemed desperately unhappy because of the rain, and were all growling gloomily. When she awoke, both the growling and the rain went on just the same. The growling was the heavy, regular breathing of her sister Jane, who had a slight cold and was still asleep. The rain fell in slow drops onto Anthea's face from the wet corner of a bath towel, out of which her brother Robert was gently squeezing the water to wake her up, as he now explained. "Oh, drop it," she said rather crossly. So he did, for he was not a brutal brother, though very ingenious in apple pie beds, booby traps, original methods of awakening sleeping relatives, and the other little accomplishments which make home happy. "I had such a funny dream," Anthea began. "So did I," said Jane, wakening suddenly and without warning. "I dreamed we found a sand fairy in the gravel pits, and it said it was a Psammead, and we might have a new wish every day, and—" "But that's what I dreamed," said Robert. "I was just going to tell you. And we had the first wish directly, it said so. And I dreamed you girls were donkeys enough to ask for us all to be as beautiful as the day, and we jolly well were, and it was perfectly beastly." "But can different people all dream the same thing?" said Anthea, sitting up in bed. "Because I dreamed all that as well as about the zoo and the rain, and Baby didn't know us in my dream, and the servants shut us out of the house because the radiantness of our beauty was such a complete disguise, and—" The voice of the eldest brother sounded from across the landing. "Come on, Robert," it said. "You'll be late for breakfast again, unless you mean to shirk your bath as you did on Tuesday." "I say, come here a second," Robert replied. "I didn't shirk it. I had it after brekker in my father's dressing room because ours was emptied away." Cyril appeared in the doorway, partially clothed. "Look here," said Anthea. "We've all had such an odd dream. We've all dreamed we found a sand fairy." Her voice died away before Cyril's contemptuous glance. "Dream?" he said. "You little sillies, it's true. I tell you it all happened. That's why I'm so keen on being down early. We'll go up there directly after brekker and have another wish. Only we'll make up our minds, solid, before we go, what it is we do want, and no one must ask for anything else unless the others agree first. No more peerless beauties for this child, thank you. Not if I know it." The other three dressed with their mouths open. If all that dream about the sand fairy was real, this real dressing seemed very like a dream, the girls thought. Jane felt that Cyril was right, but Anthea was not sure, till after they had seen Martha and heard her full and plain reminders about their naughty conduct the day before. Then Anthea was sure. "Because," said she, "servants never dream anything but the things in the dream book, like snakes and oysters and going to a wedding. That means a funeral. And snakes are a false female friend, and oysters are babies." "Talking of babies," said Cyril, "where's the lamb?" "Martha's going to take him to Rochester to see her cousins. Mother said she might. She's dressing him now," said Jane, "in his very best coat and hat. Bread and butter, please." "She seems to like taking him too," said Robert in a tone of wonder. "Servants do like taking babies to see their relations," Cyril said. "I've noticed it before, especially in their best clothes. I expect they pretend they're their own babies, and that they're not servants at all, but married to noble dukes of high degree, and they say the babies are the little dukes and duchesses," Jane suggested dreamily, taking more marmalade. "I expect that's what Martha will say to her cousin. She'll enjoy herself most frightfully." "She won't enjoy herself most frightfully carrying our infant duke to Rochester," said Robert. "Not if she's anything like me, she won't." "Fancy walking to Rochester with the lamb on your back," said Cyril in full agreement. "She's gone by the carrier's cart," said Jane. "Let's see them off, then we shall have done a polite and kindly act, and we shall be quite sure we've got rid of them for the day." So they did. Martha wore her Sunday dress of 2 shades of purple, so tight in the chest that it made her stoop, and her blue hat with the pink cornflowers and white ribbon. She had a yellow lace collar with a green bow, and the lamb had indeed his very best cream-coloured silk coat and hat. It was a smart party that the carrier's cart picked up at the crossroads. when its white tilt and red wheels had slowly vanished in a swirl of chalk dust. "And now for the Psammead," said Cyril, and off they went. As they went, they decided on the wish they would ask for. Although they were all in a great hurry, they did not try to climb down the sides of the gravel pit, but went round by the safe lower road, as if they had been carts. They had made a ring of stones round the place where the sand fairy had disappeared, so they easily found the spot. The sun was burning and bright, and the sky was deep blue, without a cloud. The sand was very hot to touch. "Oh, suppose it was only a dream after all," Robert said, as the boys uncovered their spades from the sand heap where they had buried them and began to dig. "Suppose you were a sensible chap," said Cyril. "One's quite as likely as the other." "Suppose you kept a civil tongue in your head," Robert snapped. "Suppose we girls take a turn," said Jane, laughing. "You boys seem to be getting very warm." "Suppose you don't come putting your silly oar in," said Robert, who was now warm indeed. "We won't," said Anthea quickly. "Robert, dear, don't be so grumpy. We won't say a word. You shall be the one to speak to the fairy and tell him what we've decided to wish for. You'll say it much better than we shall." "Suppose you drop being a little humbug," said Robert, but not crossly. "Look out. Dig with your hands now." So they did, and presently uncovered the spider-shaped brown hairy body, long arms and legs, bat's ears and snail's eyes of the sand fairy himself. Everyone drew a deep breath of satisfaction, for now of course it couldn't have been a dream. The Psammead sat up and shook the sand out of its fur. "How's your left whisker this morning?" said Anthea politely. "Nothing to boast of," said it. "It had rather a restless night, but thank you for asking." "I say," said Robert, "do you feel up to giving wishes today? Because we very much want an extra besides the regular one. The extra's a very little one," he added reassuringly. "Humph," said the sand fairy. "Humph. Do you know, until I heard you being disagreeable to each other just over my head, and so loud too, I really quite thought I had dreamed you all. I do have very odd dreams sometimes." "Do you?" Jane hurried to say, so as to get away from the subject of disagreeableness. "I wish," she added politely, "you'd tell us about your dreams. They must be awfully interesting." "Is that the day's wish?" said the sand fairy, yawning. Cyril muttered something about "just like a girl," and the rest stood silent. If they said yes, then goodbye to the other wishes they had decided to ask for. If they said no, it would be very rude, and they had all been taught manners, and had learned a little too, which is not at all the same thing. A sigh of relief broke from all lips when the sand fairy said, "If I do, I shan't have strength to give you a second wish. Not even good tempers or common sense or manners or little things like that." "We don't want you to put yourself out at all about these things. We can manage them quite well ourselves," said Cyril eagerly, while the others looked guiltily at each other and wished the fairy would not keep all on about good tempers, but give them one good scolding if it wanted to, and then have done with it. "Well," said the Psammead, putting out his long snail's eyes so suddenly that one of them nearly went into the round boy's eye of Robert. "Let's have the little wish first." "We don't want the servants to notice the gifts you give us." "Are kind enough to give us," said Anthea in a whisper. "Are kind enough to give us, I mean," said Robert. The fairy swelled himself out a bit, let his breath go, and said, "I've done that for you. It was quite easy. People don't notice things much anyway. What's the next wish?" "We want," said Robert slowly, "to be rich beyond the dreams of something or other." "Avarice," said Jane. "So it is," said the fairy unexpectedly. "But it won't do you much good. That's one comfort." It muttered to itself. "Come, I can't go beyond dreams, you know. How much do you want, and will you have it in gold or notes?" "Gold, please, and millions of it." "This gravel pit full be enough?" said the fairy in an offhand manner. "Oh, yes." "Then go out before I begin, or you'll be buried alive in it." It made its skinny arms so long and waved them so frighteningly that the children ran as hard as they could towards the road by which carts used to come to the gravel pits. Only Anthea had presence of mind enough to shout a timid, "Good morning, I hope your whisker will be better tomorrow," as she ran. On the road they turned and looked back, and they had to shut their eyes and open them very slowly, a little bit at a time, because the sight was too dazzling for their eyes to be able to bear. It was something like trying to look at the sun at high noon on Midsummer Day. For the whole of the sand pit was full, right up to the very top, with new shining gold pieces, and all the little San Martins' little front doors were covered out of sight. Where the road for carts wound into the gravel pit, the gold lay in heaps like stones lie by the roadside, and a great bank of shining gold shelved down from where it lay flat and smooth between the tall sides of the gravel pit. And all the gleaming heaps was minted gold. And on the sides and edges of these countless coins the midday sun shone and sparkled, and glowed and gleamed, till the quarry looked like the mouth of a smelting furnace, or one of the fairy halls that you see sometimes in the sky at sunset. The children stood with their mouths open, and no one said a word. At last Robert stooped and picked up one of the loose coins from the edge of the heap by the cart road, and looked at it. He looked on both sides. Then he said in a low voice, quite different to his own, "It's not sovereigns." "It's gold anyway," said Cyril, and now they all began to talk at once. They all picked up the golden treasure by handfuls and let it run through their fingers like water, and the chink it made as it fell was wonderful music. At first they quite forgot to think of spending the money, it was so nice to play with. Jane sat down between two heaps of gold, and Robert began to bury her, as you would bury your father in sand when you're at the seaside and he has gone to sleep on the beach with his newspaper over his face. But Jane was not half buried before she cried out, "Oh, stop, it's too heavy, it hurts." Robert said bosh and went on. "Let me out, I tell you," cried Jane, and was taken out, very white and trembling a little. "You've no idea what it's like," said she. "It's like stones on you, or like chains." "Look here," Cyril said, "if this is to do us any good, it's no good our staying gasping at it like this. Let's fill our pockets and go and buy things. Don't you forget, it won't last after sunset. I wish we'd asked the Psammead why things don't turn to stone. Perhaps this will. I'll tell you what, there's a pony and cart in the village." "Do you want to buy that?" asked Jane. "No, silly, we'll hire it, and then we'll go to Rochester and buy heaps and heaps of things. Look here, let's each take as much as we can carry. But it's not sovereigns. They've got a man's head on one side and a thing like the ace of spades on the other. Fill your pockets with it, I tell you, and come along. You can jaw as we go if you must jaw." Cyril sat down and began to fill his pockets. "You made fun of me for getting father to have 9 pockets in my suit," said he, "but now you see." They did, for when Cyril had filled his 9 pockets and his handkerchief and the space between himself and his shirt front with the gold coins, he had to stand up. But he staggered and had to sit down again in a hurry. "Throw out some of the cargo," said Robert. "You'll sink the ship, old chap. That comes of 9 pockets." And Cyril had to. Then they set off to walk to the village. It was more than a mile, and the road was very dusty indeed, and the sun seemed to get hotter and hotter, and the gold in their pockets got heavier and heavier. It was Jane who said, "I don't see how we're to spend it all. There must be thousands of pounds among the lot of us. I'm going to leave some of mine behind this stump in the hedge, and directly we get to the village we'll buy some biscuits. I know it's long past dinner time." She took out a handful or 2 of gold and hid it in the hollows of an old hornbeam. "How round and yellow they are," she said. "Don't you wish they were made of gingerbread and we were going to eat them?" "Well, they're not, and we're not," said Cyril. "Come on." But they came on heavily and wearily. Before they reached the village, more than one stump in the hedge concealed its little hoard of hidden treasure. Yet they reached the village with about 1,200 guineas in their pockets. But in spite of this inside wealth, they looked quite ordinary outside, and no one would have thought that they could have more than a half-crown each at the outside. The haze of heat, the blue of the wood smoke, made a sort of dim, misty cloud over the red roofs of the village. The 4 sat down heavily on the first bench to which they came. It happened to be outside the Blue Boar Inn. And that's where we leave off for today. Join us next time to find out what happens next when the children try to spend the money as we finish chapter 2. Thanks for listening.